So why don't we get started? So here we go. So yesterday we had just started the Imrei Yaakov on Sif Yud Beis. We were talking again about intruding on someone's privacy by building a window or a door that is exactly opposite or overlooking that neighbor's property. And we had just started the Imrei Yaakov on the Sif, so why don't we start it again? Yesh Osrim, there are those who say that it's usher to build a window, even to build a window that overlooks what your neighbor is doing, or a door that is opposite your neighbor's door, even if both parties consent. And the reason why is he says the Isser D'Oraisahu, because it's a biblical prohibition in that, you know, it's a lack of modesty. That's the concern. Va'afilu shtar v'kinyan lo mahani. And therefore, even if they make a contract, according to this opinion that it's a violation of standards of modesty, then even when you have two consenting parties to it, it's still not permitted. V'yesh omrim deha isur b'kapeda talia, but there are those who disagree, and they say that no, that it's dependent upon whether one party is disturbed by this invasion of privacy. But if both parties agree that it's acceptable, then it's okay. And therefore, according to the second opinion, it is okay if two parties consent to have windows open to each other's property. Delo adif mehezek ashan o shar hezek, because it would be in that respect no different from a situation where my neighbor is causing something injurious to emit from his property. And as long as he gets my permission to allow it to continue, it's okay. So for example, let's say he's playing loud music, but I happen to like his choice I enjoy his playlist, right? Or let's say he's got some smoke coming out of his house that may be damaging to my property, but I tell him that I'm forgiving. So according to this opinion, it's no different when a person is peering into my property. If I forgive that, if I am willing to allow it, so then it's permitted. So you have two opinions, and I guess a person could rely on the second opinion if he's able to convince his neighbor to accept the invasion of privacy. Umasha nohagu hayom livnot batim mishutafim. He says, you know, you have these duplex houses or townhouses which share a stairwell, or let's say in an apartment building where the two apartments on the same floor have doors that are mamash opposite each other. My son lives in an apartment which is an apartment building which is exactly that way. You open his door and the neighbor's door is directly opposite on the other side of the stairwell. So is that permitted according to halacha to construct a building in that way? He says, Efshar dezegam alpi de'a rishona. He said it could be that even the first opinion that we cited would hold that that's permitted. Mishum de bizmanenu b'derech klal b'knisat habayit yesh hall or prosdor. So listen to Rav Stern's thinking. He says, today, when you build a front door to your apartment or to your townhouse, in general, there is what they call a foyer or some other kind of vestibule where you're not doing private activity, mamash, in front of the front door. You know, it used to be in the old days, when you would build a house maybe had one room or at most two rooms, right? But today, our houses, thank God, are much larger. And when you open the front door to a house, you don't have full view of private activity. You don't have a view of the bedroom. You don't have a view of the kitchen. You don't have a view of other places where private activity is going on. The houses are constructed in such a way to shield the visibility of rooms where private activity is going on from the front door. And therefore, it's arguable that this would be permissible, even according to the first opinion, which says that you're not allowed to violate standards of privacy even when both parties consent, simply because the opening of a front door is not, and peering into a person's front door is not a violation of that person's privacy. Okay, so I just wanted to, that this argument is really a game changer. But as far as having front doors opposite each other, according to halacha, it shouldn't be a problem at all, using this argument, which I think is a very valid argument today, in today's day and age. But it still will not alleviate the issue of, let's say, opening up a new window, which will allow you to peer into your neighbor's property. Chalon, and we had seen this before. He's quoting the Shulchan Aruch. We had seen this quoted in the Likutim. If a person wishes to open up, to install a new window on his house, on the side of the house which opens up or which has visibility to his neighbor's backyard or his neighbor's property, gamim rotzeh gavoa, even if he wants to make it like a skylight, such that he can argue, I can't see from there because it's above, it's above my head, the window. The neighbor can still prevent him from building that window because he says it's an invasion of my privacy. And even though the window is above your head, right? It's like it's on the last foot of a 10-foot high ceiling. It still doesn't satisfy me because maybe you'll climb up a ladder and you'll peer through the window. In other words, it's a psychological issue as well. If I'm used to having a brick wall adjacent to my property, and all of a sudden you want to install a window, that makes me very uncomfortable. I'm not going to be able to, I won't feel comfortable doing the same activities that I used to do in my backyard with the knowledge that maybe one of your kids is climbing up a ladder and peering out the window and watching what I'm doing. So that's a very important consideration if you want to change the way that the houses are configured. And the only way that this would be permitted is if you were to get permission from the neighbor. Keneged chalon, so you're not allowed to construct one window facing another window, even if there's a public thoroughfare in between, provided that these windows are above like on the second story, above the public thoroughfare. So now the Imrei Yaakov adds a new layer of complexity. He says, "Kishem sheyachol limchot b'misha rotzeh liftoach chalon, shelo yazikenu behezekriya." He says, just like it's permissible in halacha, you have every right to protest someone who's going to open up a new window because you feel it's an invasion of your privacy. Kach mishi yesh lo chalon yachol limchot b'misha rotzeh livnot kotel keneged chalono. Similarly, if I have a window with a beautiful view, and you are now going to put up a structure that's going to obstruct my view, I have a legal right, according to halacha, to protest, to tell you, I don't want you to obstruct my window. Now, shelo ya'afil olah, because you're darkening my house. There are actually laws about shading, like we talked about before, about casting a new building, casting shadows on the neighbors. And there has to be a distancing of the new wall or the new structure away from the neighbor's property. And here the halacha states that it has to be a minimum of 4 cubits, which when you think about it is not a huge amount of space. And it should really be subjective depending upon the amount of shade that is cast and the obstruction of the view. But the halacha doesn't seem to take those into account. It just says, as long as you distance 4 cubits, which is probably not more than 6 feet, then you're within your rights to put up a wall. But as we'll see when we go into the Likutim, we'll see that it is within the purview of the city council or the Beis Din to institute additional restrictions for situations where a person could say, I bought the property because of the view, or the property value will drop 20% because you've obstructed the view to this house. These are all legitimate financial claims that any responsible Beis Din would have to take into consideration. So again, let us continue. Or similarly, let's say my neighbor plants a tree that's going to grow right near my window and is going to obstruct and darken my house, going to cast a huge shadow on my house that I don't want. Imhu ilan avagadol, if it's a very thick and large tree. Lahadlik or beveso o bachatzero balayla. Now, what about another situation? What about my neighbor wants to install huge lights in his backyard so he can have, let's say, he wants to put in a basketball court in his backyard and he wants to have these really high intensity halogen lamps, or what they don't use. Do they still use halogen, or is there LED lamps? He wants to install these really high intensity LED lamps, and it's lighting up the whole area. So is that permitted according to halach? David, are there laws about that in construction? The ho'or nichna. Yeah.
You're asking a very good question. As far as lighting goes, I haven't come across it, but I know we have a neighbor in our backyard, a couple doors over, that has this LED light that's like 5,000 K, which is almost like surgical light. It's so bright and it's shining towards our house. So Sherry wants to go there, knock on their door and tell them to change the direction of it. I told her maybe they want for security. But as far as bylaws go, I'm sure there are bylaws, especially when you're getting into buildings, communities, or we have like a baseball field near houses. I'm sure there's times and directions that the light can face, for whatever activity.
Okay, so this is what he's addressing now in this commentary. He says, so let's say a guy wants to put in a light either in his house or in his courtyard that's going to be shining outward to the other neighbors. And the light is invading my area and it's bothering me. It's preventing me from falling asleep. So who does he quote now? He's quoting now the Pischei Choshen, which is also a fairly contemporary sefer. He says, Nira dekaven diyachol halal laha'afil shelo yikanesa or leveto, harei bazeh amrinan dahanizak tzarich laharchik atzmo. Surprisingly, he suggests that because you can always put drapes or blinds on your window, you cannot compel halachically the person with the high intensity light to lower the lighting, because you can always block the light from coming into your house by putting on shades. Umashma midivrei haposkim shelo chashashu lahezek avir. So, and then basically he says that it seems from the poskim who discuss all of these issues that they're not worried about a damage that is caused by, let's say, compromised air quality because you're building in it, you're creating a higher density of structure when there was previously lower density. At the imhirchik dalet amos mehachalon, as long as you distance your new structure 4 amos away from my window, then shari livnos kotel afshehu monea avir mechavero. Then it is permitted for the neighbor to build a wall, even though it's going to prevent a nice cool breeze from coming into my window. And it sounds like that's not taken into consideration in halacha. Umikol makom. So we've discussed three things now that really are substantive quality of life issues. One is uh, creating an obstruction in front of my window, which is going to create shade. Um, another one is excessive light that's going to flow into my house at night. And the third one is air quality or a breeze that blows into my house, which will now be prevented because a new structure is going up. Now, in all of those situations, they're really the psak halacha, at least as it's presented in most of the Sfarim, does not seem to grant that many rights to a person who feels that the quality of his living is being compromised, either because there's new shade, there's too much light, or there's an obstruction of the breeze. But with all of that said, even though there doesn't seem to be much written about granting rights to the current tenant whose quality of life will be changed, Mikol makom bizmanenu yesh la'ayin. He says it could be that in today's world, things have changed. V'talui bazeh, v'talui b'minhag hamakom. And it would all depend upon the minhag of the place. In other words, it's true that perhaps in the ancient and medieval world, when these laws are being written, people weren't concerned about beautiful views and people weren't concerned about air quality and breezes because they were just trying to survive. But today, these issues have become much more substantial and they do affect people's choices in real estate and they affect property values as well. And certainly a person can say that your construction project is causing me a financial loss because it's devaluing my house. That's a real Choshen Mishpat issue. That's a real dollars and cents kind of issue that I can bring up at a Beis Din. I may not, perhaps, even if you'll argue that I cannot prevent you from putting up a structure next door to me that may compromise the quality of my living inside my house, but at least I can at least sue you for the drop in my property value that I might be able to sue you for. So these are all things that we have to take into consideration. Okay, let's take a look at the next piece of the Imrei Yaakov. We had said that if the windows are higher than ground level, then even if there's pedestrian traffic in between the two houses, you can still prevent your neighbor from opening up a window opposite to your window. And he explains, Perish Haven de Karka Batem Gavoa Mishol Rishus Harabim, the Yeshmakom Beveso Shenunirala over Rishus Harabim. He says, and the reason is because if I already have an existent window, let's say on the second floor, and there's no visibility to the pedestrian traffic from the street to look up into my window, that means that I can perform private activities in front of that window. I don't therefore have to guard my privacy when I'm doing activities by that window. Therefore, if you're going to put up a new window and you're going to have full visibility into what I'm doing, you're causing me damage. And you can't make the argument, well, if your window's open to the pedestrian traffic, what difference should it make? The answer is that because the pedestrians are not looking up to have visibility into my window. But now that you're building a window also on your second floor on the other side of the street, you will have greater visibility into my private space, and then I can stop you from doing it. And finally, B'nei Rishus Harabim Yecholim Liros Afilu Chalon Neged Chalon. He says, if, however, it's a first-story window, and there's already pedestrian traffic that has full visibility through that window, then I have no halachic right to prevent you from building a window opposite my window, because since I already have to not do private things in front of that window because of the visibility of the pedestrians, I have no claim against you if you want to open up a window opposite it as well. V'af al pi chein lo yiftach adam chanut keneged petach o chalon chavero. He says, but despite what we've just written, there's another halacha that has to be respected, and that is if your friend has a house and he has a window, and there are pedestrians walking up and down the street anyway, so you might say, well, then there is no limits to what I can build on the other side of the street. Yes, there are. He says you should not open up a retail store that is directly opposite your friend's residential window of his house. Why? He says, because you're adding to the invasion of his privacy. What does he mean by that? He says, because there's a difference between passerby visibility and stationary visibility. In other words, yes, it's true. My house opens up to a busy street where there are a lot of pedestrians walking up and down the street. But most of the time, people don't stop and pull up a chair right in front of my house to watch what's going on. So therefore, quite often, maybe, you walk past a person's house and you see that they have the television set, right, facing the window, and you can sometimes even see what channel a person is watching if you walk by their house and it's like in the den, right? But since you're walking past the house, usually you don't stop and stare. But if a guy sets up a retail establishment on the other side of my, of the street where my house opens up, the window of my house opens up to the street, there's stationary traffic now where previously there was none. You've got the proprietor of the store who is sitting in his store all day. Maybe he's going to want to watch everything that I'm watching on TV when it's a slow sales day. And I'm going to feel put out. That's an invasion of my privacy, where I feel that someone is constantly sitting across from my house and looking into my house. It's one thing to have passers-by. It's another thing to have someone stationary there all the time. I just had this memory of this great movie with Jimmy Stewart, a Hitchcock movie called, was it called Rear Window? Was that the name of the film? Does anyone remember that? Was it Grace Kelly and Jimmy Stewart? No, am I dating myself too far back? Come on, one of you has to remember that film. It was
no idea.
Oh, come on. Rear Window. It was a classic Hitchcock film.
I want to go watch it now.
1 second. It was Jimmy Stewart. There we go. Rear Window, Jimmy Stewart. Rear Window is a 1954 American mystery thriller film directed by Alfred Hitchcock and written by John Michael Hayes, based on a short story. And basically what it is about a guy who breaks his leg. That's Jimmy Stewart. And he's at home all day, totally bored. So he gets a pair of binoculars where he lives in an apartment complex. And he starts snooping on what all of his neighbors are doing. Okay. And then he's witness to a murder, right? And so you've all, Raymond Burr is the murderer, right? And he it's all about, and it's with Grace Kelly, Wendell Corey, Thelma Ritter, and Raymond Burr. Okay, if you've never seen this film, you got to go after the Yomim Tovim. Make sure you see it. Okay,
is it something we should set an example by, or?
Well, it's sort of.
Want us to follow those actions?
No, Jimmy Stewart was doing the wrong thing. Al pi halacha, he was snooping on his neighbors. You're not allowed to.
Okay, just wanted to clarify. Even
though he's a good guy, Jimmy Stewart, but